Hello, friends. It is Tuesday. We are here. We are live from my studio in Maui. I've been talking to some people about mixing today, which is fun. I've been talking to a lot of people about commitment, which is kind of the backbone of good singing, in my opinion. It really has a lot to do with what your tone sounds like, with how you prepare for a note, how you finish a note, where you're placing a note, what your plan is versus how you intend and how you execute that plan. So it touches a lot of parts of singing, like a whole bunch. So I think what I would love to talk about is commitment, but also if we talk about mixing, it's very the same conversation, because when you're talking about mixing, you're talking about, if you don't know what mixing is, it's mixed voice is what you'll hear a lot of people call it. It's chest voice mixed with head voice. So your chest voice is your speaky, hey, ah, very powerful, speaky, forward, engaged sound. Most people talk in their chest voice. Then you have head voice, which is a different register. We're adding a muscle group, and we're up here. Ha! Mickey Mouse voice, SpongeBob voice, right? It can be up here, just kind of above this feeling of engagement. You're more engaging and you're now vibrating more in here and here, whereas before in your chest voice you're vibrating in here. So you can figure out how that feels to you to be in both different places. Before we even talk about mixing, we have to talk about both of those and really strengthening both of them individually. So if you are a singer that normally speaks and sings in their chest voice, like, then we want to get you more familiar and strengthen the muscles that make your head voice happen. So I would say just hang out in your head voice a whole lot more often. For guys, they often call this a falsetto. Although there's different schools of thought about where the falsetto ends and just like a different register actually begins. Like, guys have head voice as well. It's just that it's not talked about a whole lot. So falsetto would be way up here at the top of your voice, but then you can also bring it forward and keep it in the same register. But it's just a different tone to it, right? Falsetto, I think, refers to falsetto. It's like a false voice. It's not really very strong. It's very light and fluffy. So that's how most people distinguish those. And I would say 85-90% of the people that I see are more speaking in their chest voice as opposed to their head voice all the time. Although it does exist. Some people end up speaking in their head voice all the time and they just don't very much get into a very strong spot. And so what we want is for these people that just speak in their head voice all the time, we want to get them to come down a little bit, maybe practice lower sounding speaking so that they can feel that extra engagement. It's a forward feeling. Your chords are coming together a little more often, more closed more often. So what we want is to get you balanced on both sides of your break, as we call it, but I hate calling it a break. I call it the bridge, because that's what it's called in Italian, the passaggio, which is basically a bridge or a hallway too, in between those registers. So, hey Belle, welcome. We're talking about chest voice and head voice and eventually mixing. So first thing to do is get both of them on the same page as far as strength and placement, and make sure you can play around in both areas. So chest voice is not just full belt all the time. Chest voice is a little more soft as well. It can be softer, it can be low or high. Head voice, same thing. It can be soft or it can be a little louder. It can be a little more bright. It can be straight tone or vibrato. And there's lots of different ways that we can play with these spectrums. So we are working on making sure that we feel comfortable in both registers, in both your chest voice and head voice, because that's what the mix is. It's a mix of both of them. And if one of them is weaker than the other, you're not going to get a very strong mix. You know, it's like mixing blue and yellow together. And if you have a very weak yellow, you're not going to get a very strong green. You're going to get a mostly blue, slightly tinge of yellow, kind of not really green. It's going to be more teal than green. You know what I mean? I like that metaphor because it feels like that's what you're really doing. You're pouring paint into a glass, and you are bringing most of your chest voice and most of your head voice in, but both of them are not fully the color that comes out. You know, it's a whole new feeling, and ideally it should sound the same as where you just came from. It should be nice and powerful if you want it to be. There's light mix as well, but you don't have to force a lot of power, because it can be very tenuous at first when you're trying to mix your voice. So first things first is wherever you feel your weaker register is, strengthen it. And this takes time and patience and messing up a whole lot and not feeling very good at all, and sitting in that, you know me, I'm always going to talk about the mental part of it, right? We have to sit in that uncomfortability of not liking what's coming out very much. Because if you're one of those people that never uses their head voice, for whatever reason, some people feel like it's a whole different voice, a different person, so they don't like to go up into their head voice very much, and so it's a very uncomfortable, dysphoric kind of just a weird universe up there. But I think it's really important to at least try it so that we start to train your nervous system to not feel like it's wrong to be in your head voice. You know what I mean? Same for vice versa. If you're a person that talks in your head voice all the time, up here above the fold, then we bring it back down, and it may feel like you're being too masculine or too forceful, or too, I don't know, too aggressive, assertive. But in reality, those are just ideas that society has put on us about our voice, and it's really important to expand where you feel like you're able and allowed to go in your voice. You know, I want you to be able to reach all four corners of your voice. I think of the voice as a 3D tone palette, kind of around your head, around my head, and I want you to be able to go to all the extremes, you know, like light and fluffy down here, light and fluffy up here, but then move forward and bring both of those registers all the way through your range into a forward, powerful sound. So chest voice down here would be I'm bringing it very forward and narrowing the sound so that the chords can come together fully. And it's a different sound, but it's a very similar note, right? Same thing up here. Becomes just because I'm changing where I feel like that note is going to and how much power I'm putting into that note, because I know all four of these kind of spaces really well, and I guess there's more than four if you think about it 3D, but it's really good to just explore more. You know, I tell people to do cartoon voices in the first couple lessons constantly, because 9 times out of 10 people don't explore what their voice can do because it feels fake. You know, it feels not real. It feels like not their real voice. And so they're afraid to go out of what their normal speaking voice is, because when they do, they laugh, they feel like it's not a real thing. Like that's not your actual voice that you can use when you're singing, but it's all your voice, And so when we're talking about committing, like you can't commit to doing something that you've never explored before, I mean, I guess you can, but it's a lot harder. And so I always say start with the sandbox time, right? Start with playing around. But within that playing around, find some moments of commitment. Like if I start with a Mickey Mouse voice to find my head voice, ha 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 ha. Maybe I'm going to play with committing to a louder Mickey Mouse voice, ha ha, right? Maybe a little longer, or like a siren or something. That takes a little more commitment, a little less fear, and leaning in. Just leaning in. It's all about allowing and leaning in. So the other piece of this is making sure you have given yourself a safe environment to do this play in. Real environment and internal environment being the most important. So when you're committing to this, you want to feel safe, right? Because it's really hard to take a leap that you've never taken before if you don't feel safe. So making sure you have safe people around you when you're singing, which is why a lot of people don't sing in their houses. They're worried about neighbors, roommates. Totally understandable. So find a car. If you don't have a car, borrow a car sometimes from one of your friends. It's so important to have that space where you feel like you can make noise safely. And a lot of us are people pleasers, and so we don't feel like it is safe to bother anybody ever. And that's a big deal. Because as singers, we have to be able to make noise. We have to be able to commit to louder sounds if you're going to explore your voice properly. Because if you're always worried about somebody hearing you, then you're always going to be holding back, You're always going to be hesitating, and you're never going to be able to feel what it feels like to fully let loose and to fully commit. It's always going to be a battle on the inside. And that's not a great environment to practice singing in. The other part is your internal environment. So we want to make sure we know our mind really, really well, which is why this is the first thing I cover in my group program, Vocal Magic. We talk about, number one, what do you want out of singing? Where are you coming from? Number two, what is your gremlin saying to you all the time? What is the thing that starts the battle to happen, right? If you go to sing a note and you hesitate, what's the voice in your head that's causing that hesitation? Is it, oh, you're not going to be able to hit that note, so better back off? Is it something like, oh, I'm worried somebody will hear me, so I better chill out? Is it, I'm worried that it's not going to be perfect or good enough, and so you stop, you give up, or you're muscling so much to make it a perfect note that it also cuts off your sound unknowingly. It's less of a direct correlation, more of an indirect correlation. But our fight or flight response directly corresponds to what our first instinct is to do in moments of stress, of moments of, I don't know what's about to happen here, this is new. And so we have to really get to know our mind and love it, right? That's the next important step. We can't be like, oh, my stupid brain is doing that stupid thing again where it just won't let me do anything that I want to do. No, it's not your brain's fault. It's not your fault. It's your gremlin. It's this amalgamation of all the negative voices that you've ever heard in your life about your voice that comes together and creates this little dude on your shoulder going, you are not good enough. And so we really need to, in my opinion, every singer needs to really get to know what's going on in their mind. Therapy is awesome. Highly recommend therapy. That was the best way for me to get to know what my default was. Like, that's how I learned that I actually had diagnosable anxiety. And I was like, well, that makes a whole lot of sense, because I have worried about everything my entire life and I can't shut it off. And that, honestly, for some people, it's not helpful. But for me, it was really helpful to just know and start to love myself a little more and not blame myself for worrying so much, because it's the resistance and the inner battling that is so painful. And when you're talking about as a singer, you're literally battling yourself, right? You can create sound when you're speaking or yelling to a friend across the street, but when we're singing and that gremlin comes in and is like, you better not go for that high note, you're not going to make it. There's an inner battle that's happening, and your muscles start to take that direction from your brain, and they start to tighten up. They start to go, oh, well, depending on your fight or flight response, like if you're a fighter, you're going to go, oh, well, I'll show you. I'm going to muscle this note into existence. And if you're a freezer, you go, oh, okay, not even going to try, So it really is a direct line from your mind to your voice. So if you're having trouble committing, just get to know that voice in your head. Number one, love it. Say, hey, my gremlin is George. I'm like, hey, George, I love you. You're the best. Also the worst. You're a pain in my ass, and I need you to go away, right? So, George, thank you for your opinion. I'm not listening to it today, right? This is what we have to, as artists, as people who show up in the world. We all have that inner critic voice, that gremlin voice, whenever you take a little teeny step outside your comfort zone, right? So when it comes back, if you know he was coming, it's less of a scary thing, and then you're more likely to be able to separate from your gremlin and to not actually listen to what he's saying. Whereas before, when he comes in and he says, oh, you better not even try that, you always listen and be like, oh, okay, I better not even try that. But now you get to start making your own decisions instead of believing all of those voices, whether it was your mom or your dad or your aunt or your third grade choir teacher or whatever that created that Frankenstein gremlin that is now in your ear all the time. And so when we're talking about committing as it pertains to mixed voice, we tend to either default into pushing really hard or not pushing enough. And like I said, mix is this tenuous place where you're mixing your blue and your yellow, but what happens if you hesitate at all, then you stop pouring one of them and it becomes all blue, right? Or the opposite. If you hesitate, you're not sure what's going to come out, you don't know exactly what's happening, you stop your commitment, then one of them is going to take over. You're going to bail into chest voice or head voice, whatever is the most default for you. So this is where preparation is really helpful. Committing to a sound and a feeling before you sing a note, but with the foundation of evidence and rehearsal beforehand, which is why we practice, right? We test it out in our car, in our studio, in our play room, whatever we want to call it, your sandbox. And so we play around and we make some weird noises until we find a repeatable feeling and sound that we like and that we are intending to do. Especially with mixed voice, it takes a lot of experimentation. Like, ooh, that was like 40% head voice, 60% chest voice. I think I want to see if I can get a little more of a balance. Or like, wow, that was like 20% head voice and 40 or whatever, math, 80% chest voice. That was really not what I wanted. I feel like I was bailing a little bit. And like I was just telling somebody, like, people who are professional singers come to me and are like, man, how did you get so good at mixing? It's just, as a thing, I never felt super comfortable in doing. And I'm like, literally, every day I was in my car for 6 months, I just messed up. It's all about failing. And then you find a place that works, and you're also building muscle at the same time. It was just that commitment to, I'm going to learn how to mix. And, I had learned what certain people said. There are many different schools of thought on how to mix, and I tried a bunch of different ones. And eventually it wasn't just one thing that was like, ooh, that's the way. It was me experimenting and committing to this feeling and finding it again and losing it, and finding it again and losing it, and finding it again and losing it, trying a different mix, a different percentage and losing it. It's just over and over again doing the thing, and then you find your path. You find the place that works for you, and you've also built enough muscle up so that you can hold these muscle groups together at the same time instead of bailing into one or the other. Even if you don't know, that's okay. You don't have to know right now. This is a big topic. But overall, it's about commitment, right? Whether it's over time or in the moment, you're committing to this feeling that you've practiced, most likely. You're committing to making that happen. You're committing to not bailing. You're committing to holding these muscle groups at the same time, working together. And we're committing to letting a nice, beautiful sound out of our body. We're committing to letting loose a little more than we usually do. Most people come to me as singers, and I teach a lot of beginner, amateur level. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. Most people come to me and they are so, how do I put this? They are so perfectionist, and I am a perfectionist. I love you all so much. That we don't let any sound out of our body that doesn't sound perfect, right? And this is why they come to voice lessons like, hey, can you make my voice sound better? I'm like, okay, cool, great. But we're gonna have to get really comfortable with imperfection. We're gonna have to get really solid with failing over and over again, and that's a hard thing if you're a perfectionist. This is why vocal training is healing all around. It's a very holistic thing, because you start to get really comfortable with failure, because you have to. In order to make the sound that you want, you have to get to all the other sounds that you didn't want and build muscle at the same time. So one of my favorite stories about this concept is in 2017, I decided to do a 100-day singing challenge. Post every single day, because people were doing 100-day whatever challenges. This is like a trend on Facebook or whatever that you saw. You know those things. And one of my friends was like, okay, I'm doing 100 days of singing. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do it with you. And then I just kept going. And she eventually had to drop off for whatever reason. But I just kept going. I did, I had maybe 1 or 2 days where I took a day off because I'm a human. But having that commitment, and my rules for myself were, this is very important, my rules for myself was, I am not going to judge myself. I'm not going to put a disclaimer on here. I'm not going to say, oh, don't listen to the high note, it wasn't very good. I'm not going to say, I didn't warm up, so forgive me. I'm not going to say any of that. I'm not going to apologize for how my voice is. I'm just going to post it every single day. And by doing that, I became so comfortable with putting imperfection out into the world. I started getting more roles. I started saying yes to myself more at work and not letting my boundaries fall. I started speaking up in my relationship that wasn't working. I started going to therapy. I started learning why these systems in my life were not fulfilling. And I started doing the things that I wanted to do, even if it meant things fell apart. So in those 100 days, I learned to commit to myself, because that's the most important thing you can commit to, especially as a singer. You have to commit to yourself, how it feels, and going for it. If you hesitate, just like in mix, you're going to bail into your default, right? That's always how it goes. So highly recommend like an imperfection challenge of some sort, even if you're not a singer. Just sharing yourself for 100 days. It really trains your brain and your nervous system to stop freaking out so much when you are less than perfect, when you're less than polished. It really makes a big difference, which is why it's a part of my program now. Spoiler alert. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing to talk about when we're talking about learning how to mix or learning how to be a better singer in general. We have to be okay with imperfection. We have to be okay with failure. We have to be okay with letting weird shiz out of our body. You have to be okay with it. And if you're not, it's okay. Take one little step. And over time, you will become more okay with it. But that's where the very first little inkling of commitment is necessary. Commitment and allowing play very hand in hand in singing and in all art in general. You know, you're committed to something, but the art that you create may evolve as you go, and you have to allow that as well. So they seem like opposites sometimes, commitment and allowing, but it's also it's a balancing act, just like mixing. You know, you're committing and you're allowing, and you're allowing at the same time. It's a very tenuous place at the first. When you start it, it's gonna feel a little scary and a little wobbly, and you may mess up. If we're talking micro and macro, you're gonna mess up. It's gonna happen. I don't know anybody who has ever just gotten mixed voice, unless you've been trained from very little child to not even think about your chest and your head voice, which is hardly anybody. So it really does take a lot of committing and then riding the train. I just call it riding the train. This is why music is so beautiful and so hard at the same time, because it's a decoration of time, right? I heard that once. If painting or visual art is a decoration of space, then music is a decoration of time, which is so cool. And it makes it really hard because we want to create this beautiful, perfect piece of art, but it's almost never as perfect as we envision it. I'm not going to say almost, it's never ever as perfect as we want it to be, because every time you do it, it's going to be slightly different, right? On the 100-day challenge, how long did you sing for on the daily? I think I did at least a minute was my parameters for myself. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be a snippet of a song. It doesn't have to be a whole song. Although I think I started doing whole songs by the end of it. But I needed to ease my way into it, And I think you will be surprised at, not only will it feel less scary to put yourself out there, but your voice will actually also get better and improve because you're not fighting it so much. You're not fighting yourself so much. So that's a big thing. It's a big deal. And if you're playing around with mix, find a space that you can just play. Make sure you have more close to equal strength in both registers, and then just play around with it. My favorite thing to do is have people speak up there, like, oh my God, hey. So it's not full head voice. It's not, oh my God, hey. And it's not, oh my God, hey. It's not full chest voice. It's, oh my God, hey. Kind of right in the middle there. And you'll find where that little slip is in between the chest and the head voice feeling. You'll start to feel it. My students today said it felt like Tetris, when that piece just fits in just right. Oh my God, hey. And so if you can do that, we can just lengthen it. Oh my God, hey. And you watch yourself, watch your mind, watch that gremlin, watch the muscles here, because they're going to want to bail. They're going to want to either tighten or give up. and your default is going to want to come back, right? Whether it's your chest voice or your head voice. So like my default is usually just to bail into my head voice. But if you're a more pop singer or belter, your default might be to just bail into your chest voice. So like, oh my God, hey, right? You tend to add in that extra weight of the chest voice, which up there is really high for just a belt. So be careful when you're doing this, because when you bail into your chest voice, even if you don't mean to, that's a lot of pressure on your chest voice, a lot of pressure on your vocal folds. So make sure you warm up before you practice this. Please, 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 if you remember nothing else I said, warm up fully before you practice mixing, okay? Just do it. Just do it. Please make sure you're fully warm before you practice mixing, because of that exact problem. Because if you end up bailing into your chest voice, you're going to have way too much pull and you're going to hurt something. So you need to be warm before you're practicing this, and take it easy, right? I don't want you to be practicing for an hour every day. It's not healthy. Little bits at a time. 10 minutes, maybe, right? Warm up for 10-15. Practice mix for 10-15. Done. We don't want to oversing. Don't want to overpush. So just keep an eye on what's happening. As always, focus on how it feels. You're committing, but you are committing to imperfection. You're committing to the in-between. You're committing to mixing blue and yellow to make green, and that takes some experimentation. So you're committing to experimenting. That's how I want you to start if you're on the beginning of a mixed voice journey, or beginning of your singing journey in general. Play around with different sounds. Play around with lightning sounds. Play around with making them really heavy. Play around with putting a lot of muscle and only a little muscle. And play around with, how do I make this sound with almost no effort whatsoever? I just want you to play around in all the extremes so that the middle stuff becomes more second nature to you. Okay. I think that's all I have to say today. Commitment and allowing. Commitment, allowing. Commitment, allowing. And warm up before you mix. All right, I'm going to go. Thanks for hanging out, Belle. Appreciate you. If you're watching the replay, thank you for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Let me know how your mix is going. I'm always available in my DMs. I would love to know what you're working on. And if you need any help, I'm here for you. I don't want you to feel like you're just alone just because I'm on Instagram. And it's if you're not one of my students that I can't ever reach out and help you, I'm happy to. Just let me know. And if we need more coaching, let's do some coaching. But my studio is pretty dang full right now. So keep your eye out for, I'm going to release a couple smaller things pretty soon. So if Vocal Magic was like too much for you at this moment, totally fine. More stuff coming. If you're interested in working with me for a 6-month program, which is my signature group program, Vocal Magic, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this stuff over and over again, let me know. The more interest I get, the sooner I'll open up another cohort. So if you're curious, DM me. There's a link in my bio to schedule a trial session with me so I can get to know you. We can decide what level is best for you. And then I'll put you on the wait list if you're curious. So I think that's all I have to say. Love you very much, and I'll see you soon.